Revenge films.
My name is Michael. This is a story about an incident from 1 year ago. But right around that time, I had just started college. I had never worked any kind of job, not even part-time before. So, in order to learn a little more about society, I decided to start a job. Little did I know that I was going to be roped into the most outrageous incident there. I ended up getting a part-time job at a convenience store, but there I had a senior colleague named Kevin. When I first started the job, he was placed in charge of training me. Generally, he was quiet and didn't say much, but when it came to the things he wanted to talk about, he would speak endlessly about himself. I did think that he was a pain, but because he was my senior colleague and we overlapped shifts together, I always just listened and nodded my head in agreement to his stories. Kevin often spoke to me about himself, especially about his girlfriend. Apparently, his girlfriend had long, straight black hair, and she was super beautiful. To be honest, I didn't have that much interest in listening to stories about somebody else's girlfriend, but there wasn't anything else to talk about, so I always pretended like I had some interest as I listened to him talk. One day, I had the day off of work, so I decided to go to a diner that was near my house. I was going to that diner every now and then, and I had also been using it whenever I would do my homework or I had reading to do. I sat down in the seat that I always used, and I opened up the menu. But then, when I got up to try and go use the restroom, I saw a familiar face. As I got closer, I realized that it was Kevin sitting there, and sitting in the seat across from him was a woman, so I assumed that that must be the girlfriend he was always talking about. In order to go to the restroom, I needed to pass by the table where they were sitting, and I didn't think it would be right to ignore him. Just as I was thinking that, we accidentally made eye contact, so I had no choice but to say something. However, that was when I noticed that something seemed strange. When I spoke to Kevin, and without thinking, I asked him if he was on a date with his girlfriend today. All of a sudden, the woman that was sitting across from him turned to me. With tears in her eyes, she said,
"No, that's not right. I am not his girlfriend at all."
She said that so suddenly and had turned to me with such intensity that I started to panic. Not only that, but then the woman started asking me to help her. I didn't know what was going on, and my mind was running in circles and confusion. But then, in the seat directly next to them, there was a guy that clearly looked like a gangster. That man turned to me and glared, and he said that this was none of my business and that I better hurry up and get lost. But when I looked over at the woman, she was pleading towards me and begging me not to go, shaking her eyes and crying. I didn't know what to do, so I decided I would go to the bathroom for a moment and calm down and try to think about it. When I sat down, I was able to organize my thoughts. I didn't know what the woman was saying to me, but I felt there was no mistake that there was some kind of trouble and things were not looking good. While I was in the bathroom, I decided to contact the police. And then, when I walked out of the bathroom and passed by Kevin's seat once again, the woman was still looking over at me, her eyes begging for help. I figured that the police should be arriving soon, and in order to buy some time, I decided to muster up the courage and ask what on earth they were talking about. That was when the gangster-looking guy cut in, and he said that the two of them were in debt, and they were in the middle of discussing how they were going to pay back that debt. But then the woman started pleading towards me again. "That's not true. I don't know anything about this." I still didn't know what on earth was going on, and Kevin was simply sitting there without saying a word. I was wondering if there was some financial difficulty, but the woman's face seemed so desperate, and I couldn't feel like her crying face was a lie. I was trying to figure out what to do when the police finally arrived. The police then asked if I was the one that called them, and I nodded yes. The first thing they did was to kick the gangster-looking guy out of the diner. The gangster-looking guy and his group kept shouting that they didn't do anything and they were throwing a tantrum. But of course the police had the upper hand in the situation. For the time being, Kevin and the gangster-looking man were taken away by the police. I was then left alone in the diner with the woman, so I decided to sit down with her and ask her the details of what had happened. Since she didn't know my name or who I was, I started with the self-introduction. I told her that I was working part-time at the same place as Kevin, and I told her my name. And then the woman introduced herself and said her name was Michelle. She told me about the sequence of events that led to this situation, and I was beyond shocked by what I heard. I had assumed that Michelle was dating Kevin since she looked exactly like the girl he had described to me as his girlfriend. But not only were they not dating, she said that they had never even spoken to each other before. So when I asked her why they were sitting together at the diner, Michelle said that she was walking down the street that day when suddenly, out of nowhere, Kevin came over and spoke to her. Apparently, Kevin said that he needed to talk to her about her debt. In reality, Michelle had grown up in a single-mother household and they were quite poor. She knew that her mother had gone into debt just so that Michelle would be able to go to college, and she figured that maybe it was a debt collector about that particular loan. And so she decided to follow Kevin into the diner and listen. However, when she actually got into the diner, she noticed that there were other men around that looked like gangsters. And then, out of nowhere, Kevin said to her that she needed to start working a shady job at night for his sake. And then he started crying and begging her. Just as she had started panicking about the situation, apparently that was when I walked by. The story was so outrageous that I had a hard time believing it. But when I looked at Michelle as she was telling me the story, she was insistent that this was the truth. For the time being, instead of only taking Michelle's side of the story, I decided I needed to speak to Kevin as well. The next day, I knew that I was scheduled for a shift with him at my part-time job. Michelle said that not only were they not dating, but she didn't even know Kevin. So I asked him what was going on. But that was when I found out just how truly crazy and dangerous Kevin was. When I was telling him that Michelle said she had never spoken to him before, Kevin said to me with a dead straight face, "We don't have to speak because our hearts are already connected." When he said that, I was shocked. But then, when I asked him on top of that whether they'd ever gone on any dates together, his response was, "Yeah, of course we have. We're always walking home together." When he said that, I was starting to become even more confused and couldn't wrap my head around the situation. So then I asked him, if they're walking home together, then they must be holding hands or talking to each other, right? But Kevin said, "We haven't held hands together, not yet. That's because we're walking with a little bit of distance in between us. But distance doesn't mean anything to the two of us because we're connected." When he said that, I started to have a bad feeling. So when I asked him how much distance was between them when they were walking home together, he said it was about 50 meters. I felt a chill down my spine. To my disbelief, Kevin wasn't Michelle's boyfriend or anything like that. He was simply a stalker. And in his mind, he had to come up with an entire imaginary situation. And when it came to the incident about the debt, he thought that he was already dating Michelle, and if he could get rid of his debt, the two of them would be able to be happy. So that's why he asked her to start working a shady job at night in order for them to live happily together debt-free. This time, when I tried explaining to him that that money had nothing to do with Michelle, Kevin was saying that because they were dating, it was given that she should help him pay it back. And at this point, I couldn't understand what Kevin was thinking at all. I started to feel like this was way too crazy, and I thought about telling the police about it, but if I didn't have any evidence, the police wouldn't do anything. On the day of the diner incident, I had exchanged contact information with Michelle. So I decided to tell her that I spoke to Kevin and what he told me. She was terrified. She asked me to go with her anytime she needed to go somewhere, so I decided to do that for now. Michelle was also suffering a lot of mental damage, and she said that the gangster-type guy was also following her around and she was reaching the edge. I figured if I would be able to alleviate at least some of that uneasiness, then I should try to help her. Then one day, when Michelle and I were walking, Kevin suddenly appeared in front of us, and then, glaring at me, he said, "What the hell do you think you're doing, laying hands on my woman?" And as he said that, he pulled out a wrapped-up towel from inside of his jacket. As he unwrapped it, he drew a knife. Michelle screamed, and she ran directly behind me. Pastor Bray also started screaming, and the whole area turned into a panic. I tried to tell Kevin to calm down, but none of the words I was saying were reaching him at all. He just kept muttering to give him back his woman. I wanted Michelle to at least get away, and so even though she was stuck behind my back, I told her to just run. With tears streaming down her face, she ran off somewhere. I was then left to face Kevin alone, but since he was holding a knife, I was beyond terrified on the inside. Kevin started coming closer to me and said, "You got some nerve going near my woman!" He was still muttering these things, and he started swinging the knife. I was holding Michelle's bag, so I was able to defend myself from the first swing, but he kept going through the bag and stabbing, and my arms were covered in injuries. I didn't have any weapon whatsoever, and since the attack was completely one-sided, I lost my balance. Just when I thought it was over for me, Kevin was stopped by the police and taken down. For a moment, I didn't know what had happened, and I couldn't understand the situation. But it turned out that as soon as Michelle had run away, she immediately called the police. Of course, Kevin was arrested on the spot as he was caught in the act. After what had happened previously, Kevin was declared guilty of intent to murder. It was decided that he would be kept behind bars for a while. Until the very end, Kevin kept insisting, "That guy stole my woman! That's why I was going to kill him!" But thankfully, Michelle denied all of that to the police, and thanks to that, I was completely cleared. If anything, he was also guilty of stalking her, and the police said he wasn't going to be able to come out from behind bars for a while. After everything had finished, I wasn't exactly her knight in shining armor, but she told me she had feelings for me, and we began dating. I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams that the part-time job that I got just to learn a little bit of society would get me roped into an incident like this. But honestly, it felt like something straight out of a TV series, and I still don't feel like I actually lived through that experience. But I hope I never have to see him ever again.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.